Welcome to the Make Work Not Suck podcast.
Ryan, imagine you built a $2 million business and then your dad locked you out of it. Would you fight, flee, or completely reinvent yourself?
I think I would go completely reinvent.
Okay. Complicated answer. I think it depends on the circumstances. But I think it's worth a longer conversation, because today I think I want to tackle what happens after your dream turns toxic, right? Especially if it's involving your own family. There can be some very complex dynamics there, and I think it's worth digging into.
Well, I think the other interesting dynamic with this one is why is the job market for ex-founders like damaged goods? Why do we treat ex-founders as damaged goods?
I don't know if I treat them as damaged goods. We'll see. I'm not sure if I totally agree with that. But I'd be curious what data you've got to support it. I think it's interesting how sometimes success can become a trap especially for small business owners and founders. So we've got kind of two thoughts here. One is around founders, family businesses, and the other is around founders and the traps of success. Where do you want to start first?
Let's go with the first one.
Okay. So you started a business, grew it, it's being successful, and now you're getting pushed out by your family. I think, well, you said you'd walk, right? That you just walk away and reinvent yourself. I think I would probably dig my heels in, renegotiate, claim my equity, and fight for what I've built.
I will tell you, and maybe this is because of I've been in a situation like this. It wasn't with my family, but it was with a high school friend. We started a business together.
All right.
And a longtime business partner that, for even to this day, years later, I don't know why I was shoved out of the business. I mean, I know I have my assumptions because the investors didn't like the way I did things. And so, I became the odd man on the totem pole. I was forced to figure it out. Like there was no winning in trying to reclaim. It would have burned bridges more so. It would have been just disastrous. And so I think just walking away and building bigger, better. I mean, I'm so much more happier today.
Right.
Than if I'd have, even the misery that they stuck with, the two partners that stayed in the business, they were miserable for the few years after that.
Right.
So
I think some of it, when I say it depends, I think that's what I'm going after. Is I think it depends on the power dynamics. Like I've been pushed out of a couple of companies, several of which I had equity in, but I wasn't the founder, right? I was employee number, 5 or whatever. And in that sense, I don't really have a whole lot of leverage. And if the founders lost trust in you, there's not a whole, you can try to win that, but even if you win, I still think you lose. Like, even if you convince them to hire you back, I just think your job's going to suck. And in that instance, I think it's better to walk than it is to try to fight for something that you don't really want to keep. Like that's more than likely just ego getting in the way.
Well, I think that plays for all of them though. Cause like, even in my case, I was one of the founders. I was equal founder of the business. And I think where it gets even worse, if it's family and if there is an equity share, maybe you weren't the founder, but you're the, son or daughter that is inherited part of the company, but the parent is still around. I think if you try to fight, are you just going to damage your family relationship?
Yeah.
Or is it better to, and I don't know how many people can actually, separate the business from the personal. I've seen dozens of cases where the family, there's a rift in the family for, at least a generation.
Yeah.
Versus I think the best thing is just to walk away, preserve your family relationship, just walk away and rebuild your career.
Yeah. I think a lot of people mistake loyalty for lifetime service.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think they're the same thing. I think you can be very loyal, but then there also comes a point where it's just not healthy for either side. And it's hard to see that when you're in it. But once you see it, I think it's pretty obvious that you need to preserve the relationship and walk away. You can find another job, you can start another company. You can't create another family.
Yeah, you can't decide. I mean, I guess, depends on what you believe and whatnot. There are people that build, brotherhood relationships, and
Mm-hmm.
you're my brother more so than my blood brother, and whatnot. But
Right.
at the end of the day, your blood family is, you're right, can't be replaced.
I think a lot of it does depend on the power dynamics, though, right? Like I think about celebrities, professional athletes who hire their mom or their dad as their agent. Uh, the agent technically works for the celebrity. And so this, if the agent tried to push the celebrity out of the business, that's not going to go anywhere, right? Because the talent is the talent. So I could see.
Isn't that called a conservatorship? Didn't we see that with like Britney Spears?
With Britney Spears. Yeah. I don't know all the details of what happened to Britney, but it sounded like it was awful. I think a lot of it depends on what the cap table looks like, who really owns what. And if the investors, if your dad funded it, if you've got a smaller slice of equity than the people you're sideways with, that's not a fight you're going to win. And I think it's a side note to anybody founding a company. That stuff early on doesn't sound as important as getting customers, recognizing revenue, all that kind of stuff. But that behind the scenes legal is life or death for an organization. So you've got to be very intentional about the way you structure that organization, because if nothing goes wrong, you're never going to look at it. But if something goes wrong, it defines the future. And it defines the roles and responsibilities of what happens when things break. And so regardless of how much you love somebody and trust somebody, if you're going into business with them, hire a good lawyer and spend some time thinking about what would happen if this goes sideways. Because if you don't think that through in advance, you're going to end up in a very bad place.
Well, I think that's good advice, but what happens when you're the son or daughter that, grew up in the business with your parents, and, you start running the business,
Mm-hmm.
and your parents are going to hand it over to you. That's the plan. Why would anything be otherwise noted? And then, you start driving the business successfully, and then the parent starts maybe losing control, or they start playing more golf,
Mm-hmm.
or start being less involved, but keep taking all the profits. I think that's more a realistic scenario than people starting a business with their parent and
Mm-hmm.
their, late 20s, 30s, 40s, whatever it may be. I think it's more likely when you're born into the family business, and when things go sideways, when the torch handoff is not very clear. Because at some point, especially if the parents started the company, um, they're going to want to get a return out of the business. And if it's a very profitable, growing business, they're going to be taking cash out for
Mm-hmm.
the 15, 20 years they put into it. And if you're the one of the children, or the son or daughter that's taking this over, and you're the one creating the growth, you're probably going to be a little frustrated that your parents are taking all the money out of the business.
Yeah, I had a client in that exact situation. He started a business with his dad, I think right out of college. Dad provided most of the capital and connections, but he was running the business. And he's been running it now for, I don't know, let's say 20 years. But mom and dad technically still own the majority of the business. They're just wanting mailbox money. And he brought me in to help coach him and do a little bit of strategy work. And I was like you're in like 5 different businesses that have very little to do with each other. Like, what's the vision here? Why does this thing exist? And he couldn't answer it because it just existed to make money. And I was like, that's not a strategy, but like, we've got to be better than that. But he couldn't make any progress because his parents just wanted to see the money keep rolling in. They were all very results oriented people. And we're not very interested in a vision conversation. So sure enough, I'm not working with him any longer. And when interest rates went up, he found himself in a world of trouble. And I think the business is now half of what it was when I was working with him. How do you make work not suck when your coworkers are with you at family Thanksgiving dinner?
Is it at Thanksgiving dinner, or is it when you basically have dinner with them, quote unquote, every night, or
Yeah.
you grew up with them having dinner every night, and you may be in your 20s or 30s now with your family, but
Right.
when your
When
parent is your employer.
your family and your coworkers are the same people.
Yes.
Yes. How do you make work not suck? Because that sounds like that's either going to go real well or real bad. I'm not seeing a lot of options in the middle.
What's crazy is, I'm sure, just like you, I've seen this go successful and
Mm-hmm.
failure in many ways, but it's interesting. There are more phrases in business, like you don't go in business with your family, you don't hire
Mm-hmm.
family. But
Right.
then how many of these companies have you walked into and it's like, oh yeah, my brother does this. And I mean, I'm working with a company right now where the wife is the head of sales and the brother is like the finance guy. And it,
I worked with a company that had 3 brothers that were like, one was head of sales, one was head of operations, one was head of administration, and I think mom had some equity too. So that was an interesting one, because you've got a very complex ownership structure with mom in who's not involved in the business at all, but owns a significant portion of it. That one
but
was fun.
but did those brothers own company, or they just work in it?
No, mom and the brothers owned it together.
Okay, so that's one scenario, but I think what we want to talk about are those that just work for their family.
Oh, okay. So you just work in the business. You don't necessarily have an ownership stake in it.
There may be some future something or another where,
Sure.
mom or dad want to inherit it to you, or you're going to take it over. But
Right.
I
There's a
think
handshake agreement.
there are far more people working for their parents or their parents' company
Yeah.
than, and I think you can even have this and forget the ownership stake for a second. Mom or dad may be a VP in the organization and they've hired their son or daughter at the company they work for that they don't have ownership stake into.
Oh, okay. So that's an even different one, because I was thinking about small businesses, but
I think it still classifies in the small business space. I think that's you're probably going to see that in companies with a couple hundred up to a couple hundred employees. Once you start to get into a couple thousand, you might work in different departments, or you're just a number at the corporation. But I'm
right.
still talking the M space than the S space in SMB.
Okay.
But
Yep.
I think the question is when your parent is your coworker, regardless of who owns the business, if things aren't going well, that can make work suck.
Absolutely.
So how can you make work not suck when you want to still go home at night and be able to sit across the dinner table with your parents, whether you live with them or you're visiting them?
Right.
Because the ramifications of this could be huge. I mean, this
Yeah.
creates family rifts, right?
Oh,
Where
yeah.
grandparents don't get to see their grandchildren, parent child don't talk to each other for years. I mean, it can literally destroy the foundation of the family because of a professional career.
Yeah. What's the worst example you've ever seen? Don't name names.
Honestly, you're asking me, so I'm not thinking of anything.
All
I'm sure if you
right.
give me a second, I can think of something, but at the moment, I'm not thinking of anything crazy. Nope, I got one.
Okay.
Nope, bad example. It was too
Bad example.
Actually, no. Okay, I'll give you a couple. One of them was parents started the company, brothers were running it, and literally it created a divide in the family where the business split in two, and they were rival competitors and competing against each other. Now, admittedly, that's more like they were owners and founders and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to think. I'm trying to think of an employment one. I mean, I've seen dozens of cases where the brother's working for the business and the brother has to get fired. The son or daughter's working for the business and we have to help shepherd them out to get a job elsewhere. But I'm trying to think of one that's been like headline worthy. Well, Adidas and Puma, aren't they like rival towns?
I think they were brothers. Yes. Yeah. And I think they started as brothers in kind of the lower cost grocery space, got sideways and split off. And now their companies compete against each other. Yeah. Just because you hate your family doesn't mean you can't both be successful.
Well, that's the Adidas and Puma story, isn't it?
It is. It is. I think, and I think, is it Lidl or Aldi's? Maybe both is another example of family members who started in a business together. Something happened. They no longer see eye to eye. They split, and now they've competed against each other for a long time. But I'd forgotten about Puma and Adidas. I thought that's crazy. That one's been going on for over 100 years, right?
Oh yeah, and the fact that they're both massive companies now.
It's crazy.
They're like
Absolutely crazy.
Like the town, like literally divided down the middle, and
I think so.
Red versus blue, and yeah.
There are a couple of examples of organizations that has done this well. The Guinness family did this very, very well. Guinness was owned, by, I believe, by a single family for a couple of 100 years. But they spent a lot of energy kind of investing in the character of the children and making sure that everyone's very values aligned and stuff like that. So they were very intentional. A more modern example I've seen working pretty well is the Cathy family that owns Chick-fil-A. They've got a very large family and lots of people in the business, but it's complicated. In some places, the grandson is over his uncle in the organization. And so that one I think could be pretty tricky. And it seems to be, at least from the outside, seems to be working pretty well.
Yeah, but let's get back to more practical things, because like they're all billionaires, whether they work for each other or not. Like
true.
The work doesn't really suck. And that's
if you're a billionaire,
you've inherited billions of dollars. You're choosing to be in the desk and report to your uncle.
That's fair. That's fair.
So, like,
that's a good point.
Let's get down to like literally the everyday person that has to, no control.
I do think, though, from a practical standpoint, I think it's important to remember that we can have different roles in our relationship, right? And so maybe this is a little bit theoretical, but hopefully we can make it practical, is that the way we interact as family is similar but different than the way we interact at work, right? Like if I was my dad's boss at work, there is one dynamic when we're at home that's a different dynamic at the office. And we need to understand what area we are in and what the rules of engagement are in the zone that we're in. Because I think it can be very easy for people to just kind of forget where they are and begin acting in a certain way that's appropriate at work, but maybe not appropriate at home. And so I think some sort of clear rules of engagement around what's okay and what's not okay here, and what's okay, what's not okay there. That would be probably the first thing I would recommend for anybody who works with family. Sitting down and talking about those rules of engagement be very helpful so that we're at least on the same page about what right and wrong looks like.
I mean, I'm going to take a quote from Pirates of the Caribbean, the infamous Jack Sparrow. He says, the only rules that really matter are these: what a man can do and what a man cannot do. And I think it comes down to, like, can you accept that you work with your parent or your child or children, and can you draw those lines? Because if you can't, you're setting yourself up for disaster and disappointment. And if you can, it can be a successful divide between professional and personal. And
right.
if you can't do that, then the best thing for you to do is to look for another career path.
Right. To walk away.
What's more practical? Because, the economy's crazy. Probably job hunting is not the best. I mean, if you're really good at what you do, then there's probably opportunity. But as we've said in previous podcasts, there's a ton of noise out there right now.
Right.
I don't think it's a lack of jobs in the market. I think there's just so much noise that the process is hard. So changing your career, okay, you can't accept the fact you work with your parent or your child, and this is a frustrating situation. You know, job hopping is a thing, but it's going to take months to get there. What do you do today? You're the child.
Yep.
You
work for mom and dad.
Yep. Your parent is set in their ways. They're not going to change their ways. They are who they are.
Mm-hmm.
And you're frustrated. What do you do?
I would sit down personally and say, hey, we've both got three different hats here, right? One hat is me as your son. The second hat is me as your employer or employee. Sorry, if I work for mom and dad. And the third hat might be a little fuzzy, but it's me as the potential inheritor of this business, right? If you guys are looking to transition this business to me at some point in the future or a sale or whatever that is, like I either am or I could be an equity holder in this business. So we got three different hats here, and we need to talk about what you want the future to look like. What's your vision for the future? Me as your son, me as your employee, me as a potential owner. Because most of the pain and frustration, most of the things that I've seen make work suck is when people take one set of rules from one zone and apply it to the other, right? I'm your dad, therefore I treat you like my son when we're having equity conversations. And that's a different zone. So there's different rules. So there's different roles and different ways that we need to engage. And sometimes people just don't even think about the fact that they are making assumptions there. So laying that out at the beginning and saying, I think there's three conversations being had here at once. Let's break them up and talk about each one individually. As a son, I love you guys. As an employee, this really sucks. As a business owner, I'm interested in potentially being a long-term, owner of this business, but we've got to figure out how to make all three of these pieces work, or we're going to have to talk about some different options.
Great in theory, but I think
you don't think I could pull that off? I could totally pull that off.
I think you could, but
okay, yeah.
But you're a coach. Like you're basically giving your own advice to yourself. Whereas I get that from in theory that sounds good, but I'm frustrated. I'm pissed off. I'm burned out. I have to go to this family function and put on a smile. Everything you just said is great in theory, but that doesn't solve my problem today. And equity's not even a conversation we've had a conversation on. Like, that's making a bunch of assumptions on there, right? So it's like, how I've got to work with this person, and
right.
I've got to be at a family function this weekend. What can I do to make work not suck? Like, I think one of the things is you can only control you, right?
All right. True.
So if you can only control you, you can't control the other party. How can you make work not suck? I mean, I agree with you that conversation needs to be had, but you got to get yourself out of the mindset to be able to have that conversation. And I don't think anybody's having that conversation today if they're frustrated, burned out, pissed off, etc.
Yeah, it's certainly not a conversation you want to go into hot. You want to have a level head before you engage at that level.
Well, you're not even, let's just be real. You're not even going to think about having that conversation because it's a waste of your time.
Yeah.
Like it's becoming a me versus them conversation as opposed to a win-win. And that's why I say it's great in theory, but that assumes the person is in a higher caliber mindset and prepared to have that conversation. And let's be honest, most people are not. They're ready to burn the bridge down and walk away because they're frustrated.
Especially when emotions are involved.
Exactly. So then the question is how can you reduce, how can you get yourself out of that so that you can then have that conversation?
Yeah. It's laying the groundwork for it.
So, all right. I do want to come back to the what can somebody in a frustrated situation do?
Okay.
But to Tom's point, what's the bright side of this? And I want to say this. There's a reason why there are more negative conversations about working with family than positive.
Yes.
And I do think it's because of the steps were taken to make it positive. But what could some positive things be when this goes right? Like, what does this going right look like?
I've seen siblings or family members who can be successful and work does not suck, but work's actually great because of shared values and kind of a foundation of trust. Like, I've known you for a long time. I know what you're good at. I know what you're not good at. We can have those honest conversations, and we have a shared set of values that means we're generally going to see things the same way. When working with family does not suck, it's usually because those things are present.
You can also say usually when working with family works is typically there's more people involved in the organization, so it creates a little more balance. Whether
Mm-hmm.
it's the family member reports to a different boss or the job description is much more defined and the role and the expectations. I think one issue or when it goes well is when, like you said, the expectations are aligned
Yes.
and everybody can have the mature conversation, kind of like what you were talking about earlier. When you are in a place to do that, or when you have that conversation up front before it starts,
Mm-hmm.
I think too often we just kind of go, well, I raised them well, so
Yeah.
therefore they'll be a good employee, and that does not equate.
No.
But I think on the positive side, and there's been a lot of examples of this going well, and you hear about them in like larger successful organizations or family offices. Versus, I do think it actually happens on a smaller scale in the stories you never hear.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, the thing about like you were talking about like life accomplishments. If you could do this together with your parents and the child with the like, that's legacy building.
Oh, it's beautiful.
And then just the accomplishment you can achieve as a family, as a team, and bring building that family legacy together.
Yeah, where I've seen it work, there's honest conversations around expectations, both on the work side and on the personal side. I know I worked with a guy, very, very successful. He's got 2 kids, and one of his kids has zero interest in being a part of the business. And the other one's still trying to figure it out. But their openness about that has really improved the quality of their personal relationship because there's none of these hidden expectations, none of these unspoken assumptions that you're going to take over the business someday. It's like, thanks, Dad, but I'm not interested. And he's mature enough to hear that and to live with that. I think there's also time set aside for not work relationship building. So we have the time that we work and we talk about work, and then we have the time that we're family and we're not talking about work, and making sure that you're investing equally, or at least investing intentionally in both of those is where I have seen working with family actually become a good thing.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of good. And I would love to hear some stories out there where things have gone well. What sparked this topic on was scouring Reddit, and it
Mm-hmm.
was about an individual that got pushed out. Worked for their father and got pushed out of the business,
Mm-hmm.
and trying to figure out how to move forward. Um,
I've got a good friend who works for his wife's business. She's very successful. I think she's fired him at least 3 times that I know of. Last I heard, he's back working for her again. That would be an interesting case study in what not to do. Because I think they're making a ton of money, but I think it's destroying their marriage. So there's probably some takeaways that they could get from this episode.
Ooh, that's another one. We've been talking about father son, mother daughter,
Right.
but what about husband wife?
Husband wife's got to be maybe the most tricky.
Yeah, I don't know if my wife fired me or I fired her, but yeah, it didn't end well.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't see that. I would say it's a very unique couple that can spend that much time together and not have it suck.
All right, so let's reframe the organ or the conversation here.
Okay.
So a minute ago we paused and we said we're assuming that we've got a frustration with a family member in the you work for your parent. Let's just say it's a son working for your father, and you're frustrated, and you gave the advice of having this sit down conversation, but we gotta you know still got to show up to work tomorrow.
Right.
I think there's another side of that as well that we need to address is what's the optics of the other professionals in the business that aren't family members. What's their perception of this dynamic? Is it the 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 parent is not leading the organization or their department well? Is the son getting preferential treatment, or is there politicking where it's like father versus son? I think there's so many different things on how family can be perceived between the politics, the perceived, um, well, I'm sure you've had many of these too, where it's like the son is lazy, and the rest
Right.
of the organization is pissed off because the lazy son owns a salary, and everybody else is busting their ass.
Yeah, and he's not pulling his weight.
So I think there's it's not just if you are the individual, it's also if you are in the organization and you have to work in this environment.
Yeah, I think there's so many scenarios there. So maybe let's talk about recommendations of what to do if you're in that situation. I would say a couple of things come to my mind. I would say the organization probably knows the dysfunction. So anything that you think is going on, they're seeing at 2 to 3 times the volume. That, family dynamics within an organization are going to just reverberate throughout the organization and get louder and louder as they go. I think the expectations are higher. It's kind of like being the coach's son, right? Like no matter how much he plays, no matter how much the coach plays his son, people are going to complain because it's never going to be enough, right? So there are higher expectations on you if you've got family in the leadership, in the corner office, whatever that would be. So you've got to not only pull your weight, but you've also got to maybe go a little bit more above and beyond because the expectations are going to be higher. I got a couple others, but what about you, Ryan? What advice would you give to somebody who's working in a business where some family member is in the senior ranks?
I mean, I'm going to go back down into like what's the job definition, what's the
Yeah.
goal, what's your career path, what's the KPIs and metrics. I mean, I'll hit on the everybody gets pissed off the coach's son perceives plays more, right?
Right.
I think that comes down to scoreboard metrics.
Mm-hmm.
If you're the person in the seat and everybody's thinking you're getting preferential treatment, but you're busting your ass, the scorecard doesn't lie.
Right.
So I think just point back to the numbers of, look, I'm pulling my equal weight. Here's my numbers. Here's my metrics. Here's this. And I think when you can pull people back into that common, performance metric. Now, if you've been written up 16 times and you're, the lowest man on the totem pole, yeah, I think the scorecard's not working in your favor, and you probably should find another job.
Yeah, probably should go
Expect to
someplace
be
else.
fired or everybody pissed off at you. But I think it comes down to that from the peer perspective. I think if you're one of those individuals where you're frustrated with them and you think there's preferential treatment, I would
Mm-hmm.
challenge you to look at the KPIs.
Yeah.
If you think that it's unfair, like are they meeting their numbers? Now, I don't turn this into like a me versus them and you can't be toxic about it, because if
Right.
you turn this into a toxic environment, well, guess who's going to get fired?
Yeah. It's not junior.
Yeah. And then I think if you're the parent and you're frustrated, I think this goes back to what's the accountabilities you expect of your children. It goes. I mean, I hate to make this super simple, but if you expect them to do the chores on Saturday, you probably had a conversation about expectations.
Mm-hmm.
So set the expectations for the role. I think also make sure it's clear on what your expectations are to the other team members.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I don't think this is too much different than when a skilled individual walks into an organization and gets the spotlight on them and everybody's disgruntled or frustrated or they're making us look bad. It's the same thing. It just makes it easier to call it out because it's like, oh, well, it's his son.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's really a cop out. And we do it whether it's a family member or just another skilled professional. But I think at the end of the day, it goes back down to the fundamentals. What's the vision? What's the journey? What's the culture? What's the results? And hold the areas accountable to it.
Yeah. I think that clarity of expectations up and down and side to side is crucial, because if I work for my dad and he and I do not have this shared understanding of what success looks like in my job, we're never going to be okay. And if the people who also work for my dad don't know what to expect of me, they're always going to feel like I'm not doing my job. Right. So that kind of clarity, I think, comes from whoever the senior leader is. They've got to create that clarity for the organization, or they're setting their family members up for failure.
Yeah. Well, and if you're the family, if you're the son or daughter in this situation, I think this is where you could use vision, journey, culture, results to your advantage.
Mm-hmm.
If you've got team members that think you're getting preferential treatment, just sit down and like, what do you think the vision is that my parents have for me in this role? And what you'll find out is they've got assumptions that they're assuming.
Right.
And by just going, okay, what do you think the vision is? Okay, let me tell you what it actually is. Okay, what do you
Right.
think the journey here is for me? And clarify it. I think it's go through that motion. And what you'll do is we know the assumptions, is to make an ass of you and me.
Right.
Well, let's just remove the assumptions from the equation and get clarity on what the real problem is. I think even the same thing for if you're getting, if your parent, again, if you're the individual and your parent has these expectations of you, but they're not being clear about it, the same thing. What is your vision for me in this role? What journey, what processes do you expect me to follow, or what goals, etc.
Right.
Culture should be given because it's the company culture, and then just make sure you're aligned on the KPI and results.
Right. Why am I here?
And I do think, as a father, we tend to put goals on our, especially like me and my boys.
Uh-huh.
There's the minimum bar, and then there's the higher bar, and I always hold them to the higher standard. And I think this is more intentional. Is I'm very clear with my children, like, this is the bare minimum I expect of you, but this is what I hope for you. This is what I would like to see you achieve. But this, not achieving this, is not failure.
Right.
Not achieving this is failure. And I think sometimes parents don't they only talk about this one, and so it's just the perpetual grind for excellence, because we always want more for our children.
Right. And that can be exhausting and demoralizing to them.
Right. So then some cases, I think you got this, some of these individuals, you got a parent that is expecting higher standards for you. They're throwing a lot at you because they have higher standards for you. And then you've got the coworker that's like, well, it's not fair. He's getting all the work, or he's getting the deals, or he's getting the projects. He's getting preferential treatment.
Right.
And it's like, at the end of the day, everybody's, I don't want to say wrong, but the son is being held to a higher standard than the coworker, and the coworker is being pissed off because the father is being a father to a son.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where going back in and going, okay, what's the vision here? What's the journey? I've yet to meet somebody when I've come in and said, and I don't mean this in like a family relationship. I mean companies in general. When I've gone in and said, I'm going to hold this person to a higher standard, but that also means they're going to get these other benefits and perks. Do you want in on this? Well, no, I really don't want to work the extra hours, or I don't want to put the extra work in. Okay. then you're good at your current pay, your current rate. Like, you're good. Yeah, I'm good. Okay. So then I don't want to hear any more about getting preferential treatment when they're literally operating on a higher caliber plan.
Yeah.
And I think that's a lot easier to do it in a professional setting with multiple professionals. It's just harder when it's a family dynamic, because I think a lot of those like family values and family culture and family expectations that come from childhood and being raised are just assumed in the workplace.
Yeah, they're never spoken of. They're just assumed.
The invisible system.
The invisible system.
To quote Ike, it's the invisible system because we assume what we did as a family carries over into the professional world.
Right. And if everyone's not on board with that assumption, which I'm pretty sure they are not, there's going to be gaps and frustrations.
Make work not suck. Our podcast that talks about exactly that. Our process, vision, journey, culture, and results. We present real-world business solutions that make the difference. Our goal is to make work not suck. Hosted by Ryan Hodges, co-host Daniel Steer. Join us each episode and make work not suck.